Good morning. Thank you all for joining me this morning. My name is Janine Domingues, and I'm a clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute. To meet the unprecedented mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, the Child Mind Institute has gone borderless. We are here with gold standard clinical care, advice, and resources for children and families wherever you are, all online and accessible to everyone. Here's what we can do to support you during the crisis. We are providing gold standard mental health care remotely for new and existing patients with telehealth while maintaining the same high quality care. We have free comprehensive resources for families at childmind.org/coronavirus. You can sign up for daily parent tips at childmind.org. And on Facebook, my colleagues and I are answering your questions just like this at 10 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday. And our Facebook group for parenting during the time of coronavirus is up and running. We are here for you wherever you are. Please contact us for further questions about how we can help, and I hope you'll take advantage of our resources and share them with your networks. Today, we will be discussing anxiety during the coronavirus, and in particular, how to help manage your own anxiety as a parent. I'm going to do my best to answer all questions on this topic and others, but if I run out of time, there are two ways you can get what you need. The first will be back here today at 4:30 p.m. to answer more questions. And the second, we have a team looking through your questions daily. They'll incorporate answers into our resources on childmind.org. So I thought we could just start off by kind of talking a little bit about basic strategies and skills to be able to manage your anxiety as a parent during this time, especially when you're trying to juggle potentially working from home, schooling from home, being a present parent at home, and having some uncertainty about how long this is going to be for and about the future. So the first is I want to start off with validation and self-validation. This might be a theme that you guys have been hearing about, but it is really, really important to understand that what you are experiencing right now in terms of stress and anxiety, potentially some disappointment, sadness, as you're adjusting to this new norm is quite normal. And so you really want to be kind to yourself about what you're experiencing right now. And that's helpful in the sense of it sort of allows some flexibility and then doing what you can with what you can control. The second thing I would suggest is if there are things in the past that have worked for you in terms of managing anxiety and stress, utilize them during this time too. And so that might be in the past using some mindfulness, taking 5 minutes each day to be present, whether it's with an activity or honestly just taking 5 minutes to focus on some breathing and just bringing yourself back to the moment. Whether that's also doing things like exercise and utilizing potentially some beautiful days, at least with us right here, like this one where it's sunny, and going on walks, doing that with a family. Also small things like using your 5 senses to self-soothe. So I also do this here, but we've been doing some projects and also suggesting to some families to create a self-soothe kit for each person. And that can include things that are visually pleasing, it can include music, it can include things like tea or things that you like to eat or things that are taste well to you and that you enjoy. It can include things, sensory things, squishies, soft stuffed animals. It can include pleasurable smelling things like lotion or scents that you really like. And so actually creating that kit and having a go-to can be really helpful, especially during times that seem pretty intense, that you can just have like a pre-plan to go to and help to turn down some of that intensity. So those self-soothe kits can actually be an activity that you do as a family. And then it gives you an opportunity to sort of talk about, hey, you know what, it's normal to feel sort of stressed and anxious during this time, and these are some things that we can do together to sort of turn down that intensity. I also know personally it's been really helpful for me to stay connected, connected to not only my friends and my family virtually, but also connected to my coworkers. So again, as we're trying to balance working from home, it can feel, I would imagine, particularly isolating, and maybe there might be times where it can feel unmotivating, and that can cause some stress and anxiety. And so in order to feel motivated and still feel inspired, I think banking on that connection with your coworkers, being able to sort of have that time where you're talking about other things, can be really helpful and inspiring during this time. As I was mentioning too before, staying connected again to your support system, friends, family, is very important during this time to be able to sort of manage that anxiety together. Know that you're in it together. Everybody's sort of doing the same thing. Can also help you feel like you're not alone in this process. One of the things I would recommend, or maybe a don't during that time, is potentially co-worrying with each other. So I think you can sometimes slip into a habit of sort of going back and forth and talking about worst case scenarios potentially, and that might not be the most helpful to do during this time, and it can actually increase anxiety. So use your network as a healthy distraction. Talk about things that maybe happened during the day that were funny, silver linings. Also, maybe just provide support for one another and giving tips of what worked, what didn't, in terms of your routine and your structure during this time can also be really helpful. I also think during this time you're wanting to keep informed and also keep knowledgeable about what's happening next. And I think that's also a balance about how much you're taking in terms of information. So one of the things I would say and cautioning is trying not to be on media too much and really absorb too much information. So I would really recommend having moments where you're disengaging from all the information that is out there. Maybe designating times where you're like, you know what, I'm gonna be informed in the morning and sort of watch my daily morning news, maybe one other time in the afternoon, and then that's it, and sort of letting it go, and utilizing other forms of healthy distraction to be able to take your mind off of some of the uncertainty. I would also say really choosing your news sources well, so that way you're also not potentially engaging in hypotheticals and again thinking about worst case scenarios for the future, but really just staying rooted in the factual information of what we know now, so that way it helps to stay informed, but also it helps to manage some of that anxiety and stress. Let's see, I think the other thing that's also been a big theme in terms of managing that anxiety and stress as a parent during this time is finding that new norm and structure and routine. We know that when there's uncertainty, especially about the future, that making it about the here and now and what you can structure in the here and now is really helpful. So I always say, bank on the things that you can do now that you did before in terms of your structure and routine. So here in our house, we're really trying to keep to our normal morning routine, nighttime routine, simple things like making sure we're eating 3 meals a day, and then really trying to pepper in that time of structured activity time, working from home time, and trying to be kind again to yourself as a parent as you're sort of like figuring out what works for you and your family, and sometimes having some family discussions about, at the end of the day, what worked, what didn't, what are we going to try to do tomorrow that might be a little bit different in making all of this work. So really finding that new normalcy can really be helpful. So with that being said, I'm going to see what questions we have so that way I can tailor some of this information to best support you. So one of the questions is, how can I help my kids wind down and relax during this time? That is a really great question. Again, I would say you can utilize this as an opportunity to do something as a family and as a family activity. So you can simply engage in some deep breathing exercises together with your kids, really designating, again, a particular time during the day for like 5 minutes where we're doing some belly breathing together. And what that looks like is just breathing in maybe for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, and hold and out. 1, 2, 3. And doing that as a family together can be one way of simply winding down. I think you also, with your kids, want to openly and validate their feelings of stress and anxiety too. So as I said before in the beginning, self-validation is important. Validating your kids and where they are, what they're experiencing is important too. And pairing that with, we can get through this, some positive self-talk. We're going to be able to get through this together. And then maybe engaging with them on some activities that they can find relaxing and can help them to also wind down during the day when they're feeling particularly anxious as well. And so I had mentioned before, it could be like activities where you're making their own self-soothe kit. It can be helping them to write down a list of activities that they really enjoy doing, so that way they too are peppering that into their day and using it as a way of finding joy and pleasure during the day, and also as a way of a healthy distraction from everything that's been happening. Another question for a single parent: I'm worried about my anxiety affecting my child. It is causing me to space out and go mute. Any advice? Yes, so one, as a single parent, I can imagine that this is a very anxiety-provoking time. And I would say that, again, validating where you are, how you're feeling. It's totally normal during this time. I think also potentially acknowledging that to your child too can be helpful, not in a way that is making them feel more anxious or worried, but in a way that's also paired with something that you're going to do. So saying, this also makes me feel a bit anxious and stressed, and I'm going to take 5 minutes to myself to really use some skills to help me feel a bit better during this time. And so when you're recognizing when that's happening to yourself and being in tune with what's happening for you when you're feeling anxious, I think giving yourself permission to take those 5 minutes and engaging again simply in maybe some deep breathing, some mindfulness activities, and really being able to turn down that intensity in the moment. And then once you feel less intense about the anxiety and stress, I think then you can re-engage with your child and go back to potentially talking to them about how they're feeling, talking to them about other things that they can be doing during the day, being more available to them, so that way if they have questions or if they have concerns, you can be more present as a parent during that time. But pretty much in particular, I would say, again, give yourself and allow yourself the permission to, disengage a little bit for 5 minutes and be able to sort of really deal with that anxiety on your own. I think children certainly, as you know, vibe off their parents. And if you're feeling in particular anxiety during that time, I think that's a cue for you to say, I need to take some time for myself, and that's totally okay. That's also taking that opportunity to model ways of really coping with that stress and anxiety for your child. Another question that we have here, my child's very anxious and he's going back and forth between two homes. How can I help him and provide advice to my partner so we're on the same page? I think this is a great question. I would say that if you guys have decided during this time that you're still going to share time between two homes, that's totally okay. I think being on the same page about that is really important. I think my advice would be really, if possible, talking to your child together about what that back and forth will look like, being very structured about what the time is and what the plan will be in terms of how many days he's spending with you and how many days he's spending with your partner. I would also, before even talking to your child about that, be on the same page with your partner around how you're talking to him about, in particular, the coronavirus and this time and what it looks like. So that way you guys are both on the same page and the same messaging to him about what this is going to look like. So if the structure is going to stay the same as it did before the coronavirus crisis, then that's great. You're talking to him about that and what to expect. But if it is going to look differently, you can be very specific about how it's going to look differently and why, and be very factual and simple about that language. And then again, just rooting him in what it's going to look like. And lastly, I think, again, giving your child permission to also talk to you about his concerns, how he's feeling. I think being both you and your partner being there to be pretty open about supporting them during this time, so that way you can validate how they're feeling and also collaboratively try to problem solve how best to ease some of that stress and anxiety during this time. Another question, how can I help with meltdowns? This child in particular has the words to tell me that what he's feeling, but I need techniques to help him come out of the meltdowns. I think that's a great question. What we know about kind of that meltdown period, I would say that that's a child being dysregulated emotionally, and all that means is that when feelings are very big and intense, it's a really difficult time to problem solve during that time, as thoughts are kind of jumbled and it's hard to sort of be talking sometimes during that time. So one, I would say potentially ahead of time having a plan for when to recognize when feelings are getting big, and also what can we do in those moments to help turn down the intensity. My advice would be during those times, it's not to make a feeling go away, but it's to make a feeling feel less intense. And so some really simple things might actually be what we know, one of the skills from dialectical behavioral therapy called the tip skill is really helpful in these moments to turn down the intensity. And tip stands for, the T is for temperature, and this is one of my go-tos, where you can take really, really cold water or ice packets and either dunk your face in the cold water, hold that ice, put it on you, and actually that can act as a distraction and kind of actually turn down the intensity of the emotion that you're feeling. And so that's a very go-to behavioral thing you can do in the moment, and you do it for a few minutes at the very least, so that way you're helping to turn down that intensity. And then once the intensity of that emotion is down, you can then problem solve out what to do next. You can also use paced breathing or belly breathing during that time. If your child can engage in just like some really deep breaths with you to regulate how they're breathing, and also be able again to turn down the intensity of that emotion. I think ahead of time, as I talked a little bit before about a self-soothe kit, also some healthy distractions during that time can also be helpful, so that way you already have a go-to again to turn down that intensity. And lastly, I would say during that time behaviorally, we also want to be mindful of not inadvertently reinforcing behavior, intense behavior. And so if your child's being safe and there are behaviors that you can actively ignore, you can say something like, I'm here to help you out, but I'm going to be in the other room until you've turned down the volume and we can sort of problem solve out. So also trying to disengage if you can, so that way we're not inadvertently reinforcing behavior we don't want to see. Another question is it good for my children to know what's happening about the coronavirus and explain why we cannot go out at this time? I think that's an excellent question, and my answer would be yes. So your children certainly know that there's something happening right now. Obviously, things are different in their world, different in their routine, and so they know that there's something happening. And when we don't talk about why, it actually can incite more anxiety and stress. So we do want to be mindful about having open communication about the coronavirus. It can be as simple as the coronavirus is a new type of germ, and it can make people feel like they have the flu or a cold. And while experts around the world are figuring out how to best contain the coronavirus, we're doing our part by staying in and making sure that we're healthy and safe and that others are healthy and safe. And then you can really be rooted in the things that they can do about it during this time, keeping to good hygiene, practicing social distancing, and then actually, engage in some conversation about activities or new things that you guys can do together. Maybe throw in some positive silver linings where you guys are spending more time together. We can do new activities together that can be fun and enjoyable. So that might be a good way of talking about what's happening. So certainly making it developmentally appropriate for them, being factual, and also providing ways in which they can feel a sense of agency and control in the day-to-day. So we're going to wrap up. I wanted to thank you all again for joining me this morning. I hope it was helpful. And remember, we're going to be back here at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon to answer more questions. The Child Mind Institute is here to help with the mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, no matter where you are. We have resources to help, from daily tips to consultations to gold standard telehealth treatments. So please go to childmind.org/coronavirus. Thank you.